very much. So I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Maria in a moment. First of all, just wanted to say welcome to GoGoBurn. When Michael and the MBN team approached us about getting involved in this, it was a bit of a no-brainer. We're really excited about the stuff that we've got going on from a blockchain perspective, and being able to bring all these different parties together and run something on our doorstep is really exciting. So I'm Tom McCann. I sit within our innovation team over at RBS, based down in London. Specifically, over the last year, I've been looking at what blockchain means for the bank, what we can be doing in this space. My day job is very much in the scouting side of the bank. So I look at different FinTech startups and different players in the ecosystem with venture capital and accelerators and see how we can plug in to build valuable collaboration opportunities for the bank. So today, I'm just going to take you back to where we first started when it comes to blockchain. Kind of explain to you how a bank like the Royal Bank of Scotland goes from seeing blockchain and the hype and the noise in the press and actually moving all the pieces that we need together to get it to a position where we actually have some real-life applications underway. We've got some interesting proof of concepts that we've been working on. So I'm going to start off by talking you through our Litmus Test. So this is a selection of 4 rules that we've kind of coined together that help us stay on the right track when it comes to deciding when should we actually use blockchain. It's really easy to move away from being objective and just say, we should use blockchain for this and this and this because it sounds interesting. We've got these 4 rules that kind of help us stay on a steady stream when we're looking at what we could be using for blockchain. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the different vendors and the FinTech startups and the different companies we've been meeting to try and establish what's actually going on in the market. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we find other people to work with. As we'll go through later, one of the really important things around blockchain is that you need to be working with somebody else to make it really valuable. And then I'm just going to kind of summarize where we are today and hand over to Maria, who's going to give you a bit of an insight into Emerald, a new platform we've built that's really exciting. So our first rule, if you can use a database, use a database. Very simple. Databases are a 40-year-old technology. We know what they are. We know what they can do. We know what they can't do. Blockchain, although really interesting, is an emerging technology. It's not been tested in production. It's barely been tested at all in financial services. If you can achieve the same outcome using a database that you could achieve using a blockchain, just use a database. So that's the first rule, where we try and keep ourselves on track. We have lots of people inside the bank coming up to us trying to get us to do bits and pieces of different use cases, and the answer generally is you can just use a database. Our second rule, avoid using digital currencies where the majority is owned by a few. So for this, we mean things like Bitcoin, one of the most prominent digital currencies everyone will have heard of. Less than 1,000 people own half the network of Bitcoin. Now, from our perspective, most specifically, we can only assume that the motivations of those 1,000 people aren't to further the strategic interests of RBS. So we're very reluctant to engage in anything where we're exposed to a digital currency where the majority of the currency is controlled and owned by a few whose intentions we do not know. So that's our second rule. Thirdly, there is only so much fun you can have on your own with a blockchain. This has been said in various forms a lot today, and I think it's really important. There's lots of things you could do internally, sharing information, talking to people inside the bank using a blockchain, but you really don't need to. Generally, you can just use a database. The real value for us is being able to do things with other financial institutions that we couldn't do before, or do things with other financial institutions in a much more cost-effective and resilient way than we could do before. So it's really important to that end that we go out and find people that actually want to work with us on some of these projects. So that's our third rule. And then finally, avoid replacing one centralized business model with another. So distributed ledger and blockchain enables us to do exactly that. Distribute information, distribute value, distribute the network. If all we're doing is getting another middleman to stand in the middle and say, I've created my blockchain network, you guys can all come and pay and join it, we're kind of back where we were just with a new technology. Using blockchain enables us to reimagine the tech, but also to reimagine the business model. We can get rid of this man in the middle. We've got a single source of the truth. So we're very skeptical of any of these kind of schemes, as we describe them, that come to us and say, we've set up our own proprietary blockchain network and we want you to join it. It kind of defeats the object a little bit. So there are 4 rules. That's what we use inside the bank when we try to come up with which areas should we be prioritizing for blockchain and exploration. So what's RBS been doing? We first started exploring blockchain in late November 2014. We sent a group of our engineers down to Shoreditch, to the Deloitte hackathon, actually, where they plugged in FXMP, which is our foreign exchange micro pay desk, with Ripple, the payments protocol. And they played around with that. And we started to see from then onwards some real interest from different groups of developers and engineers around the bank talking about how they've been playing around with this at the weekend. They've started mining Bitcoin personally. They're understanding what's going on. And there's some real hype developing from all over the bank as to what is this tech and what can it mean for RBS. So our research team, based over here in Gogarburn, their job is to look at emerging technologies and figure out what we should be doing about it. They spent some time doing a real deep dive into blockchain, into distributed ledger, and they wrote some sort of brilliant series of papers that went to our CEO and our exco and got the top of the house really up to speed when it comes to blockchain and distributed ledger. So we went to them and essentially said, this is what blockchain is. It's really exciting. What should we do about it? Is it an opportunity for us? Is it a threat? Where can we make the most of it? And they came back to us and essentially just said, keep playing around with it, keep experimenting, reach out, find people to work with, see where we can find really valuable opportunities to use this technology to better serve our customers. So that's what we went to do. So we had an idea of how we triage our use cases. We've got our litmus test. We've got our mandate from Exco to go off and see what we can do here. What we really needed to understand was what was actually going on in the market. So we evaluated a large number of startups, vendors, and technology incumbents. Looking in the news, we were seeing all of these different names flying around, all offering us the next best blockchain. As a large organization, we get a lot of organizations approaching us, trying to sell us their blockchain solution. It's very difficult for us to sit there and go, this is something we should be pursuing, or this technology is better than that technology. So we conducted what we called a tech bake-off. We got lots of these guys in through our scouting network. So RBS has a network of scouts that operate down in London, over in Silicon Valley, and out in Tel Aviv. And their job is to work with FinTech startups, work with interesting people doing things in an innovative way. And we use that network, we leverage that network to go and speak to hundreds of these different companies and really laid out in a massive pack what is the difference. What's the difference between multi-chain and Ethereum? Is credits better than Hyperledger? Is Ripple better than Symbiont? Try and figure out what was useful for what. If we're looking at trade finance, what sort of technology should we be looking at? If we're looking at payments, what's the best thing to be going for? That's on the technology side. On the commercial side, we began to see two really obvious streams when it came to these different organizations. We kind of put them in two buckets, which we called the schemes and the suppliers. The schemes are the organizations I was referring to a moment ago. The ones that have built, it's generally really interesting technology, but it's a proprietary code base. They built something, we can't really see what it is, and if we want to get involved in the network, we need to pay to join, or pay per transaction. We kind of felt like those sorts of guys are just getting us back in the vendor lock-in situation we've been in with legacy technology. We're much more interested in the guys that we brand the suppliers. The guys that are either using open source technology, like Ethereum, or they're creating their own open source technology, kind of forks of Ethereum and other bits and pieces. And we've started to see that the market's been going in that direction a little bit more. You may have seen R3 are announcing that they're going to open source Corda. It's a really interesting move that we've been pushing for as part of our membership in the group. The real value of distributed ledger and blockchain, from our point of view, is having enough people on it, adopting the network, that it becomes valuable. If we have all of these different companies out there with a proprietary blockchain network, we're never going to achieve the adoption we need to make it useful for all of us. So our focus and our priority on this space has always been very much towards, let's work with the open source guys, let's see how many people we can get involved, and let's see what we can deliver together. So we understood that. We had our litmus test. We know what the use cases are. We know how we're going to prioritize them as we come across them. We had our mandate to keep looking, and now we started to navigate the market. We know what's going on outside the bank. We now needed some people to play with. So to that end, we joined the R3 Consortium. So many of you know what it is. I'm not going to go into too much detail and steal all of Brian's thunder for the next session. But essentially, having a consortium for us to work in was really, really important. Firstly, it gives us an opportunity to speak to the regulator as a collective. It doesn't really matter how good the technology is or how solid the business case is when it comes to blockchain if the regulator isn't on board with it. We can come up with a brilliant new payment system or trade finance system, but unless the FCA says we can use it, we can't use it. So for us, it's really important that we make sure, as we go along this journey, progressing with blockchain and distributed ledger, that the relevant regulators are involved with us as well. The other point was all about research. We've got a fantastic research team, as I mentioned, over in Gogarburn, but it doesn't make a lot of sense that all of these major banks around the world are spending all this time and money doing exactly the same research and coming to the same sort of place. The expertise that R3 gives us and various stakeholders we engage with through it, and the collective resources of all the banks, mean we can accelerate our learning and our development when it comes to blockchain technology. And that's been really valuable. But most importantly, it just provides us with a way to get in the room with a load of other banks. Banks traditionally are very competitive. They work on their own. They're not good at collaborating. It's very new. It's a cultural shock to the banks, and it's difficult to do. Having a facility where we can all go and sit in a room with a lawyer present to make sure everything's legitimate and say, who's interested in payments with blockchain? And 6 guys put their hands up, and we all go and stand in this corner. And say, who's interested in trade finance? And another few guys put their hand up, and we all go and stand in that corner. And we start to understand which areas of interest these different banks have. Someone like RBS has a very different makeup to the likes of Goldman Sachs, for instance, or Citibank, major US investment banks. For us, the use cases that we want to prioritize through our Litmus test are going to be very different to theirs. So for us, R3 or any consortium provides a way to bring that together and find out who we want to work with on different things. Again, just accelerating the way we go. I think one thing we've learned through doing this quite quickly is there's no point trying to be the winner from a bank's perspective when it comes to blockchain. If we run ahead and build loads of fantastic blockchain applications, but Barclays aren't doing anything, when it comes to going around again and saying, OK, guys, let's get you on board as well so we can work with you, we're not going to be able to do it. From a payments point of view, just hypothetically, in the UK, Lloyds, Barclays, and RBS are the big players. That's where our customers make our payments too. If these guys aren't coming along on this journey with us, again, we reach the same problem we had with regulation. So we're only as fast as our slowest member. So having this consortium where we can all start to move at the same sort of pace and understand where each other are is really important. It's also about not trying to brand something as an RBS thing. As Maria will talk about a little bit in a minute with Emerald, we're very, very cautious here not to build something that we call an RBS thing and then try and get other banks to join it with us. It's the same problem as the proprietary tech before. People often use the example of Barclays Ping It when we talk about this sort of thing. I know many of you will have heard of it. It's a way to pay your friends if you're Barclays customers. It's a really good tool. Barclays built it. They branded it as Barclays, and they set it out to the market. And no one that's not a Barclays customer uses it because they don't think they're allowed to. They don't think they're supposed to. The other banks don't push it. Whereas, realistically, anyone can use Ping It. Barclays' downfall on that specific use case was that they went too heavy on the Barclays branding. When it comes to things like this, we're very, very cautious that if we want to launch something, whether it be payments or trade finance or syndicated lending, all the banks need to feel like they're in it together. Otherwise, no one's going to want to use the other bank's platform. So that's why we're in R3, and it's a really, really useful thing for us. So we've got our litmus test. We understand what the use cases are that might be interesting to RBS. We know what's going on in the market. We've navigated the vendors. We understand who are the schemes, who are the suppliers, why does it matter. And we've finally got some people to play with. We can get in a room once a month and see who wants to do similar things to us. We now need to put all that together and start testing and iterating what actually works. So we run a series of code spikes, or innovation spikes, as they're sometimes called at RBS, where we essentially get a group of engineers in a room for a week and say, this week we're going to try and model a payment using Ethereum, or we're going to try and mock up a syndicated lending system using Corda. We marry up a technology with a use case and just see what happens. It's a way for us to test the tech, to see what is good and what isn't good for different things. It's a way for us to validate the use cases. Some of the things we did, we got to the end of the week, we went to show it to the business sponsors, and they said, this is great, but it's basically what we've got now. It's not that much more impressive. You just use blockchain. And we can start to learn what's actually going to be useful for the bank and what's going to be useful for our customers. So we did a number of those over the last couple of years, essentially, probably once a month on different bits and pieces. And we've kind of arrived now at our blockchain lab. We're in a position where we have an environment we can test ideas. We can build proof of concepts. We've got the partners, we've got the tech, we've got the knowledge. We can bring it together, and we can try different things. We've been doing lots of different proof of concepts, and some of them are progressing to pilots and more developed projects that you'll start to see in the news over the next kind of year or so as we release them to different customers. We've got a platform to scale up and implement these within our franchises. So once we've got a proof of concept, we understand it works, we understand why it's interesting, we can go back into our various business areas. RBS is a really large organization, and start to think about, okay, how do we move from this legacy tech that's currently serving our customers in this way to using blockchain? And in the previous session, there was a really good point made that it's much easier to be able to introduce blockchain technology to solve a problem that isn't already there, where there isn't already an incumbent system, sorry. A couple of the projects we've got underway is we're using blockchain because there is nothing else. So what we've got, we're not having to change anything that's already there, which makes it a lot easier for adoption. And we've also built up a center of excellence. We've got a really good research team. We've released a few really interesting white papers that you'll be able to find online. And we're definitely seen as a market leader when it comes to these consortium groups and sessions that we go to about the research and the forward thinking that we've been doing. And we want to hold on to that. So that's essentially where we are from a day-to-day point when it comes to blockchain. You may have seen us break cover with a few of the stories that we've been doing. Generally, we've still been relatively quiet, and I think the industry as a whole is just naturally quite quiet about blockchain technology until they've actually got something interesting to say. We're not that bothered about kind of doing news stories for the sake of the hype. I think everyone's sick of the hype now. You may have seen some of these break cover many of them around the things we're doing with R3, some of the projects we were doing earlier in the year with 11 banks and other bits and pieces that, again, I'm sure Brian will mention. But the thing we're really excited about at the moment is the Emerald platform that our engineers have just built. So I'm not going to go into it because I want to steal any of Maria's thunder, but Emerald is a really exciting development that's come out of our innovation engineering team. And we think it can make a real difference to lots of our customers. So on that note, I'll hand over to Maria to give a bit more of an insight. Thank you.